Hello, left fielders. At LFI, you know our focus is on networking and education. Mark your calendars because we're going to have a full day of it dedicated to you, our limited partners, at the Best Ever Conference on April 9th in Salt Lake City. Left Field Investors is opening the BEC with Passive Investing Mastery, an event focused on passive investors. This will be where insightful content meets passionate LP investors. If you enjoyed BEC last year and the meetup in left field this year, imagine them both back to back. The Best Ever Conference isn't just any event. It's the premier conference for commercial real estate investors and operators. Your ticket to Passive Investing Mastery includes admission to the entire Best Ever Conference from April 9th through the 12th. Join us April 9th, where we will have a packed agenda with sessions focused on how to be a successful limited partner led by experienced LPs, top operators, and partners. Then immerse yourself in the full Best Ever Conference, where you will be surrounded by like-minded investors, operators, and industry experts for unparalleled opportunities for learning and networking. The best part, and there are so many, but the best part, you won't find a bigger discount on the regular ticket price than the one you get for being an infielder. That's more content for an exclusive lower price. Register for the event today at leftfieldinvestors.com/BEC, and we will see you at Passive Investing Mastery, presented by Left Field Investors at the BEC.
Disruptive technology is anything that challenges a kind of societal norm, that kind of breaks open, what would you say, kind of breaks open what you see as a normal way of doing things, and you find a way that is more conducive, faster, cheaper, quicker, or quicker. I already said faster way of doing something. And blockchain has that capability of disrupting how we receive and validate information, starting with finances. That's where we kind of find Bitcoin, right? Do I need to go through multiple layers of institutions for me to receive money or send money from America to, say, Amsterdam?
Hello, left fielders. Welcome to the Passive Investing from Left Field podcast. Our community is focused on networking and education to help people invest passively and think differently. Let's go. I'm excited today to have Ben Jorgenson with us. He is a business owner and inventor who focuses on emerging technologies in Web3, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. For the last 5 years, Ben has served as founder and CEO of Constellation Network, a Web3 company. We're going to learn what Web3 is, so we'll talk about that later. A Web3 company with cryptocurrencies DAG and LTX that is building an ecosystem for developers to build Web3 applications that integrate with existing Web2 digital infrastructure, a more scalable Ethereum. So I'm not sure what all that means, but we're going to get into it. Also, Constellation is one of two companies contracted to work with the U.S. Department of Defense, so you know they're legit. So, Ben, welcome to Passive Investing from Left Field podcast.
Thanks, Jim. I really appreciate it, and thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited about this one. As I explained kind of before we started recording, our community is focused on passive investments, mostly in real estate, but we also get into some other things, and crypto and Bitcoin and blockchain. All of that is of interest to us, but you're going to have to dumb it down and give us the beginner lessons on that. So before we dig into it, your journey, how did you get into this industry? Where did you come from, and how did you get here?
Yeah, so I can go back as far back as I grew up in Indiana, and I always wanted to move out west to where kind of the future was made. I always saw technology as like this ominous thing, and smart people were out there building the future, flying cars, the computers. And so when I went to college, I had a very curious mind. I did 3 majors in 4 years. 6 honors thesis. I tried to merge different studies together and kind of paint a different picture in the world, which is kind of, I think it's pertinent to show, like, how did I find my way into blockchain, right? And I kind of use that as a stepping stone of, there's a lot of creativity in the blockchain space and industry, the crypto industry, that that really kind of my interest is finding creativity in big ideas. And I think that's kind of the core of what I pride myself on. And what I've done is that it's not, I've done a lot in the crypto space, but I've also built a restaurant group in San Francisco where I found a chef that had a creative vision, but needed kind of the oomph to get started and get going. So I also co-own 2 restaurants. The second one's about to open this week, actually, in San Francisco. And I also founded Constellation, and I actually started getting involved in both of those at the same time. And really, my passion is finding creative people that have a big idea but don't know how to get it going. And so that's, you can almost look at that from like a private equity kind of management kind of perspective, if you will. And so the way I really got into blockchain, and I think it's an easier stepping stone, is I read a book called Exponential Organizations, which I kind of call it corporate crack for junior leadership. Everybody in Fortune 500 companies reads this book on disruptive technologies that they can bring into their organization. And the book really defines kind of this immune system that Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies have towards innovation. It's antithetical to what they're doing at a company. So how do you embrace innovation? And that's what the book goes through. And so what happened was that I found myself working for the author in creating a whole business around a 12-week sprint that a Fortune 500 company would go through to identify disruptive technologies. And in that kind of list of disruptive technologies was blockchain, and the ability to use a distributed or immutable ledger to validate information. But there was also components around blockchain communities that really came to light, which was kind of the socioeconomic movement that was happening around the younger generation in finding ways of having ownership, control, or input on the kind of state or organization of an entity. And blockchain has really kind of embraced a rather big vision that is hard to understand, but it's like taking a red pill or the red pill or the blue pill in the Matrix, right? You either kind of go with it or you don't. And that's kind of your worldview, right? Just like people go, oh, I'm a Democrat or a Republican, right? It's kind of the same thing. But that's a little bit of my backstory on how I really fell into this. And once I was working for this consulting firm around this exponential organizations, this book, I am ultimately a builder. I live in San Francisco. I live right outside of San Francisco. And so I don't have a background in consulting. I have a background in building businesses. And ultimately that led me into finding the founding group of Constellation to actually build a blockchain from scratch that could answer some of the problems that are around kind of the blockchain space. And that was about 5 years ago. So it's been, I can't even believe that's, it's been that long.
Yeah, well, in this industry, a lot happens in 5 years, right? So the way I would like to start is just some basic definitions. Now, like I said, we this is complicated stuff for anyone, but for real estate investors who are used to, looking at a building, looking at some financials, this is complicated. So you mentioned disruptive technology, and we hear that all the time, but it's kind of one of those buzzwords that what is disruptive technology?
Yeah, I think disruptive technology is anything that challenges a kind of societal norm, that kind of breaks open, what would you say, kind of breaks open what you see as a normal way of doing things, and you find a way that is more conducive, faster, cheaper, quicker, or, quicker, I already said faster, way of doing something. And blockchain has that capability of disrupting how we receive and validate information, starting with finances. That's where we kind of find Bitcoin, right? Do I need to go through multiple layers of institutions for me to receive money or send money from America to, say, Amsterdam.
Okay. So again, definitions. I'm going to give you a few words here, and
Yeah.
then if you can, and I usually go one by one, but I'm not even sure if they're the same or they need to go all at once. So we have Web3, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and decentralized network. Are those all the same thing, or are those all different things? And can you just kind of talk about them individually or as a group, however they most make sense?
Yeah. So Web3, I would coin as like the industry, right? It's a Web3 is a component. The components would be metaverses, like we've heard from Facebook coming out with kind of these alternative universes or worlds, these digital worlds that we can exist in through VR headsets. Web3 consists of blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, kind of the liberation of payments and transactions outside of banking. Kind of these. It's an evolution of Web2 technology, which is more kind of read write. I go to a website like Amazon, I order something. It's not really interactive. Web3 has a more interactive social component with commerce going on. And it requires kind of a different state of thinking, if you will. So then blockchain is the underlying technology that would power a Web3 entity that's not centrally owned. And then cryptocurrency is the means of transacting within that ecosystem. Hopefully that helps.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And then the decentralized network, that's related to Web3 then? Because can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So right now you have with cloud computing, you have a lot of centralized servers that control all the information. Right. This is primarily run by Google, Amazon, Apple, and they're controlling how all information is created and shared in the world. With decentralized networking, it actually allows people like you, me, people all over the world to make up a network that processes the information versus a centralized server network like Google and Amazon. And why that's valuable, I think that's kind of the red pill, blue pill, is that there is a socioeconomic shift that's been happening over the past 10 years that people are starting to question who has control over their information. If you just think about AI today, and people are starting to question the governance of data. Where does the data come into these AI systems that actually print out information? What is the logic going into that? How do we govern that? Am I contributing information? Are they reading this without me knowing? A decentralized network provides the infrastructure that would allow for more transparency and accountability for how data goes into a system for something like AI. And it really, I think the powerful thing here, really quick to touch on that, is that it takes away from the central entity to give each person the power to participate in the processing of that network, right? We all become these nodes in a network that are able to validate a transaction. A good way to describe that is, Jim, you and I go to a bar and you say, hey, Ben, I want to buy your beer off you. And you give me $5. I give you the beer. And you go, hey, wait a second. I never gave you $5. And I said, no, I gave you the beer. In a centralized system, it's our trust between each other. In a decentralized network, we would call on the entire bar to go, hey, did that transaction happen? And so you'd have 100 other people in the bar go, yes, we saw that transaction happen. Ben gave the beer. Jim gave Ben the $5. And so that's the power of, now think about that on like a global systems of information. Was that information transferred? You're consulting or going through a consensus of all the different nodes across the world that make up that decentralized network.
Okay, and that's a great example.
Right.
It really makes it easy to understand. But I guess in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, but the bar has 100 people in it, but there's 3 people who weren't paying attention, 4 people who've had too much to drink, and 3 other people who are just going to disagree with you because that's in their nature. So,
Sure.
when you're decentralizing, how do you know that everyone is being a fair actor? Because clearly, if you're in that bar and it's all rational people who are acting fairly, they're all going to nod their head and say, "Yeah, we saw the transaction happen." But how do you protect against, someone who's like, "No, didn't see it, don't care, I'm just going to say no"?
That's actually a great question and a great example. So in a network, a decentralized network, you use algorithms to organize the network. And people that don't participate correctly or show a disagreement are actually rejected from the network. And sometimes this comes into the sense that if you've ever heard of like Bitcoin going through a fork. It's where a group of nodes or operators in the bar say, hey, that didn't happen. We're going to go with Jim's story, and they fork off and create their own narrative. Or you have a situation where those people are outliers and they're not operating correctly, right? So from a programmatic perspective, it's, hey, they don't have the right uptime. So they're not processing the transaction. They're not validating it correctly. And in blockchain or in decentralized networking, what that mechanism is called a consensus mechanism. And that consensus mechanism is used to identify the good actors, the bad actors, who's operating correctly, and participating in the transaction or validation of that transaction.
Okay, that helps a lot. So,
Great.
How do people use these blockchains and the network and all that? Because I use it, right? But I'm completely a speculator. I'm buying some Bitcoin, I'm buying some Ethereum, and it's a small part of my portfolio. My hope is that it just goes to the moon, and then I make a bunch of money, right? But I don't know anything about blockchain or ledgers, and you said immutable ledgers. Like, what is the use case other than just speculation? And there's nothing, there's a space for speculation in everyone's portfolio, but aside from a speculative investment, what is this really doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of in many ways, all stocks are speculative too, right? I mean, we're trading
Yes.
certain stocks on a price per earnings ratios that are, sometimes greater than 200 times their earnings, right? That's pure speculation. I mean, just look at NVIDIA
Yeah.
stock right now. But there's a promise of what they're capable to do, where the general world of technology is going and AI, that people believe that they're going to create a whole new market. Well, that's kind of what crypto is in many ways, but it's putting the power into more people because they're owning a product, right? And that product is a piece of cryptocurrency, and every cryptocurrency is different. And the difference between stocks and crypto is that you have some utility of that token. And every chain or every company kind of has a different utility around it. So the idea was not just to have people hold it, but it was actually to use it, right? Either use it as a payment mechanism or you use it to participate in a certain ecosystem. In our ecosystem, in the Constellation ecosystem, our currency is called DAG. You use DAG to purchase throughput to validate a transaction of information, to validate some information. And so where I think, if that's really confusing, I think it's really confusing because you need to decouple kind of the speculation aspect. So with crypto exchanges like Coinbase, they did a really great job of bringing awareness to cryptocurrency as a new asset class, which I think is phenomenal. And they've really been the juggernaut to really pave the way through the SEC, through regulation, where it's a really gray area. However, the part that really hurts me and many of these companies is that people didn't really dig into the technology and what they're building, right? It would be like you buying NVIDIA stock and having no idea what they do and just hoping it goes up, which is totally valid. And you're totally allowed to do that as long as you're an accredited investor and can trade stocks. But there is something that you have an accountability as an investor to do more research. And so with crypto, they didn't really, the exchanges didn't really do a good job of saying, hey, this is what this currency is going to be used for. This is what they're trying to tackle. And it was just hold it. If it goes up, look at trading charts. And so there's this whole other world that's being built, that's being an innovative world that's being built that uses cryptocurrency as a microtransaction within its own ecosystem. And I think that's really important because it also kind of sheds light on what use cases you can do. So with Ethereum, what you have an ecosystem of builders, much like Constellation. People build Web3 applications. They might be, it might be simply as a cryptocurrency. I want to create a cryptocurrency, and this currency is going to have a utility. You also might use these things called smart contracts, where you pay a fee to use that smart contract, and it acts as kind of like a fee mechanism. And so where I think a lot of the use cases of, so without going into the weeds too much, and I apologize if I'm going into the weeds too much, I think there's a lot of new applications that can be built in a different way of thinking than what existing structures allow us to. So the speculation really needs to shift, not on like, yes, can it go to the moon, but how can we utilize this technology and this currency where it's easier to use this currency than it would be connecting your PayPal account or your bank account to, right? And allowing some developer or orchestrator to operate within that technological ecosystem. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the confusing part is when you like DAG. I don't understand what that is exactly. It validates information, you said. It seems like that's the whole point of a decentralized network and blockchain, is to validate information. So, again, without getting into the weeds, I don't know what DAG does that's special, but my thought is if I was to buy DAG and then it's used as a currency and it has these other functions, I assume it's like on Ethereum, and Ethereum, you can build off of Ethereum, right? That's the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, is Bitcoin is currency and Ethereum is currency, and you can attach software applications or something to it. So I guess my question is, if we're going to get away from the speculative part of the asset and look at the technology, how is that going to be explained to people like me who are like, I don't know, I thought the whole purpose of crypto was to validate information. So how is it that DAG does something different or special? And like I said, I don't want to get into the weeds, but if you can kind of answer that question and explain that a little bit for me.
Yeah, so the way that if you take this Bitcoin, the network is validating that I transferred a Bitcoin to Jim, and it's a very simple transaction type. That transaction is data, right? But the data is very simple. It's a simple transaction. In my wallet, I have X and Jim does not. Now Jim has X and Ben does not. Right? That's what you're validating, is that ledger balance. Ethereum came out and they advanced it, and they said, hey, I think there's more we can do. We can make it a little more complex, right? And so you have these things called a contract. Just think like a legal contract that says, if Ben does X, Y, Z, then this transaction happens. With Constellation, we're actually allowing people to completely define what their transaction is. So they have complete customization. And why that matters is because we think that data is a form of currency. So just like Bitcoin is a currency that you send from A to B, we think that data has the same value. And so we cryptographically secure an entire data set that's customizable to the developer, so that when they pass that data, think like AI, right? Here's a subset of data that I'm going to transfer into this application. Our network is able to validate the complexity of that data. So it's really kind of the way that I see what we're doing is that we're taking Web3 tooling like distributed ledger, and we're bringing it to Web2 so that there's more transparency and accountability. Once again, going back to the AI example, being able to validate that when we took this information, nothing was hacked or spoofed as it went into the AI system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because one of my questions is how is AI going to change this? So again, I'm not fully
Yeah,
understanding everything, but so let's say you do some AI query and you get a bunch of sophisticated information,
yeah,
then the DAG or a cryptocurrency of any kind of cryptocurrency might, as one application, they might comb through that data and say, yeah, it's all valid and usable, rather than, oh, hey, there's some data that's wrong in there. We need to take that
correct.
out. And then you're saying, yes, it is. And then they can go on about their way and sell it to someone who now has validation. It's like an appraiser.
Actually, that's a really good example and a really great understanding of it, because basically you're saying, hey, who gave us this? Where's the source of this data? And then be able to attribute that data to some owner and pay them some cryptocurrency for providing that information in AI. And I think where a lot of our culture is going is around the governance of that data, right? Like, why does this matter? Well, we're starting to wonder why we're committing to all these terms and services of these freemium applications that take our data, resell it, and people are profiting. And we get to see like an image on Instagram. I don't know if the value exchange is there, and people are questioning that. Well, AI is going to only amplify that, right? When you start looking at how every industry is going to be transformed by AI, they're going to start to want attribution of that data. Where did it come from? Who gets credit for it, right? Just like plagiarizing a document or using somebody else's literature, right? Like you have to attribute ownership to that. How do you do that in a programmatic way? That's going to happen really fast in AI. And for AI to scale around regulation, there is going to need to be some sort of governance around that data and understanding the ownership of it.
So there's lots of things people are talking about AI and what it can do and what it can't and what the dangers are. And one of the things is they can make a video of me and of me saying ridiculous things that I never said, right? So you can change images, change videos. Is blockchain a potential solution to that, where it can say, it can tag on a trust line with it or something that says, no, this is clearly fake but this is clearly real in a way? And if so, how does that get back to regular people like me that I can look at it and say, oh, yeah, now I can trust that? Because there's so little trust in our society currently that it's hard to see how that would actually work.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely one way of identifying what they call like deep fakes right now.
Deep fake, yeah.
Um, Once again, like, is this person real? Is it not? Where did this image come from? How is it created? Who created it? Right? All of these things go back to attribution of the data. Where blockchain, not Ethereum or Bitcoin, can answer, but new evolutions of blockchain like Constellation, and there's a few of us out there that are tackling this. I don't want to say we're the only ones out there, but there are a couple of ecosystems very similar to Constellation that are starting to tackle kind of the same complexity of problems that open up more use cases than just validating cryptocurrency, but really validating images and the complexity of the uh, metadata that go into an image like a deep fake. And if you can validate that and check that across a decentralized ledger, you don't need to trust the entity that's putting that out, right? Which I think we're getting to a trustless world, right? Even the government, a lot of the government work we do, we call what we're building around zero trust. Not to throw another term out there, but I mean, when you work with the government, they have more acronyms and terms for everything. So we get used to like using synonyms here. But yeah, absolutely, blockchain definitely has that potential to do it, where you don't have to trust that, and you can have that little. We used to call it as a joke when we started Constellation. It's like we envision that people will have this like powered by Intel sticker that's like powered by Constellation. Where you're like, okay, that's been validated, right? That message packet wasn't tampered, spoofed, or hacked, right? And it's something that we're starting to see come to the fruition right now. Even you telling me right now that you could see this whole world around AI being like some sort of validation badge that you know that it is what you say it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great for things like email, right? If there was a little badge that came that said this is legit email rather than, I get
Right.
emails now all the time that say they're from left field investors internal operations team or whatever. And I'm like, it's just the 4 or 5 or 6 of us. I know that there isn't there anything there, but I always look at it because it looks official. It looks like it came from us. So having a little badge there, like a gateway would be great. But
Absolutely.
what is blockchain or the decentralized network? What does that look like to the consumer now, and what will it look like in the future? Because if I compare this to the internet, when the internet first came out, the business I was working with at the time, we had an office of 40 people, and they gave internet to 2 people, right? And said, if anyone wants the internet, you got to go to Joe or Sally, and they'll. So you knew you were going onto the internet to do something. Now, half the time you don't even know if you're on the internet because the internet's in your pocket or the internet is on your TV or it's your light switches are internet capable. So are we going to get to where blockchain, we don't even know it's there? It's just this application helping us and we don't even know or understand it?
Yeah, and I don't think we're there yet, Jim. I'll be very honest with you. And it's sometimes being the CEO of this company and what we're doing, I want to be there, right? I'm like, I see where it's going, but we're just not there. Nobody's there yet in this space. I think what we've seen right now are different ecosystems like Solana and Ethereum. They create these nice little applications, but they don't really pick up steam, right? There's so many hoops you have to jump through. They have things called bridges, and you got to understand DeFi. It's way too complicated. It's so cumbersome. And so we're not there yet, but we're defining an industry that attracts developers hand over fist. And that's something that you can't disagree with. Like that's the fascinating thing is people are seeing kind of this mix of community and social elements, open source mentality of contributing code to a code base, and then getting rewarded for it, right? Which is different than the internet. People contributed to the code base, they contributed to the internet, but they didn't really get rewarded for it in the way that they can with cryptocurrency. And so, to answer your question, I don't think we've found those consumer use cases that make it pop, right? Even AI's been around, AI and machine learning, you could say has been around for about 10, 12 years, I think, maybe 13. And it wasn't until Chat GBT really came out with some sort of consumer application that really like made it click. 5 years
Yeah.
ago at Constellation, when we were pitching, we were talking about big data, machine learning, and how you process data on a decentralized ledger, just like you do a centralized server base. And like people didn't really get what big data was. Now we're in this time. Now, like 5 years later, people are like, oh yeah, well AI. It's like, well, AI existed with like sales automation and stuff, but now we're starting to see the consumer impact of AI. We're not there with blockchain. It's way too cumbersome. But it does have this cypherpunk movement that's going on that's attracting younger generations. It's attracting developers because there's creative thinking involved. It's a different way of thinking. And it's kind of exciting, but I think we're still trying to figure it out. And I don't think where we are today is at all where we'll be in the next 2 years. I would say in the next 2 years, you're going to see that kind of technology. You're going to see the technology operating in your existing systems without you knowing it, right? You're not going to have to switch over from Web 2 to Web 3. I think that's kind of a misnomer. It's going to be a convergence of the two where you just don't see the technology, but it's making things safer and more efficient.
Yeah, well, I look forward to that. So, our group, the left field investors, we are investors, right? It's in our name. So how can an investor benefit from all that we've been talking about, separating the speculation from the tech, right? So I guess the question is, if I want to invest in some coins other than Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I'm not a tech guy, how do I analyze? I mean, there's hundreds, thousands of coins. They each have different applications. And really, most people are just looking at them saying, oh, it went up 10% yesterday. I better get that one. How do I pick a coin, analyze it, and say, I'm going to invest in this technology, this business, rather than I'm just hoping some other Yahoo thinks this is awesome and buys it for more than I bought it for?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was kind of thinking about our talk today, and one thing I was going to highlight is when you look at crypto communities right now. Uh, when I started this whole thing in 2017, there was this sense of like building the future, right? It was almost like startups in the early days when people you would invest in like a big vision, and now there's this less around where it can go and more what you can do for me today, which is kind of that's the greed. This I don't even know if it's the speculation. It's just like the greed. People got a taste of really high crypto prices in 2021. Now we're at this kind of leveling balance act right now, and so like I think what this industry started as like, hey, we're building a future and it's going to take a while, and we haven't really figured those applications. So as investors looking, I would look at what entities are scaling Ethereum. Are there people providing new solutions on top of Ethereum that make it faster, cheaper, easier to use? I personally would stay. My thinking is like I would personally stay away from anything that's too heavy on Web3 application or promises too much of utility around a cryptocurrency. And then my third bucket is looking at alternative infrastructures that are identifying new use cases outside of just building an NFT platform. I don't think that we've really seen that come to fruition because I don't know where the need is. But new ecosystems like what we're doing that require new developer tools open up the possibility for an X factor of adoption, right? Are we attracting more developers? Do we provide different tooling that actually merge into Web 2 with existing applications that we already have today versus trying to define a completely new application interface?
So I've always thought, when I have very little knowledge on this topic, obviously, but when I learned a little bit about this distributed ledger and about decentralized network, my first thought was, as a real estate investor, I really don't like the whole title process, title companies, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
okay, you're going to check the title. Well, I've owned the property for 10 years. Nothing else has happened. So why can't I? It should just be the same. Is this
Yeah.
one of those applications that could we completely eliminate title companies and just put it all on the blockchain and then it's just obvious that no one is interacting in a nefarious way on this property because, well, look at the blockchain.
Right. Absolutely. Like, and this gets into, this is a really great use case because I recently bought a house, and I was blown away by how many middlemen there are. And if you take away
Yes.
one thing from this podcast and episode and the power of blockchain, you're like, I don't even know what Ben was saying. The one thing I would say is that blockchain takes out the middleman. So if there's a middleman and some digital transaction like a title where you're like all of a sudden everybody's getting a percentage of a percentage and for what, just processing paperwork, like all of that can
Yeah.
be readily automated in a way where you don't need a middleman and you can trust the code and programming to execute that contract and transfer that title in a seamless way. The issue that I think is holding that up is that application interface. It's really tough to interface. How do you code a contract like this to occur? How do you procure the cryptocurrency to pay for that transaction? It's all too messy. And the group that figures out how to make that easy and you just light it up, you're going to have a significant shift in the real estate industry specifically. There's no reason that we shouldn't be able to seamlessly transfer a fraction of our property or the deed or the title to anybody we want. I don't know why there's so many loops and people that come in and they play their role for like 5 minutes in a real estate transaction, and we're giving just percentages away. Like I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it's never made sense, and like that's an easy spot to look at going, wow, this technology could come through. People could use it once it's easy to use, and you don't have to have a developer use it. Then now you're off to the races. But right now, you still need a developer to structure all this.
Right. And I guess that's the issue for me. Like you said, AI, no one really understood it, knew what it was. There was just some random thing. And then all of a sudden chat GPT. And now we're all like, instead of putting 1-800-flowers.com, they're going to
Yeah.
put 1-800-flowers.ai because that'll get people to invest. Right. So
Right.
that's what I think we need for some of these
Yeah.
applications is just someone to come up and say, hey, we're replacing title companies. Who's going to argue about that except for realtors that own a piece of a title company, because no one likes the title process, right? So, and I think there's plenty of places that this exists in our, world full of red tape and bureaucracy. But why isn't this? And I know you said in a couple of years it'll move faster, but why aren't they picking out some of these seemingly like obvious examples and just saying, hey, let's do it?
I think there's a lot of politics involved, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, we're seeing this from a high level on how the SEC is trying to come after crypto and call it securities when a couple of years ago they were saying just the opposite, right? These aren't securities, and so there's definitely a little political situation going on, right? And you ultimately get that across. And it's not just crypto. We should actually just look at every piece of technology that ever existed, right? Even down to Amazon going, hey, we're going to move everybody online. They're like, dude, that's never going to happen. We're going to have brick and mortar. And they're like, no, I'm going to take a chunk out of your business. And so people don't necessarily want to embrace technology because they have a short-sighted view that, oh, it might, remove the amount of people we hire or the staffing needs, or it might cut into some other revenue track. But that's just a short-sighted way of looking at something that is going to be disruptive, right? Going back to your term of what's disruptive, that's purely disruptive. In a title company, you have a piece of technology that you could use, but that would also mean that you would be laying off a lot of people. How does that look towards investors if they don't see the big picture? So it's a sensitive thing that I just don't think has been fully thought through on what that actually could open up. If we could actually remove the amount of people involved in a real estate transaction and shift that to people actually buying real estate, flipping houses, creating funds instead of just focusing on, I just want a piece of the title transfer transaction, that could open up a whole new pathway of innovation. That by definition is disruptive, right? And disruption typically has a bad name, but it opens up new channels completely.
And so I want to end with this, I think, and you kind of mentioned it, how the SEC thinks of some of these possibly as a security, possibly not. I thought that Bitcoin was kind of thought of as a commodity, and maybe the rest of them might be securities. And as we were having this conversation, you were explaining, the use case, the technology. It had me thinking that each one of these coins is really just a company, like you're investing in the stock market, right? It's just you're investing in a coin and its technology. So it makes sense if those were securities from my perspective, my limited perspective. And then Bitcoin seems like that's like a gold or a dollar or silver or any kind of, like, is that kind of how people are thinking? Is that how you think it will shake out with the SEC eventually?
Yeah, I think that, yes, I think there's a lot of how people fundraise, ultimately categorize their cryptocurrency into a security bucket, right? In 2017, 2018, even up till now, people raised in this kind of like, oh, we promised to add utility to this token, and thus it's not a security. So people are buying a product. And those kind of failed efforts really kind of left the market with a bad taste. So I do think that going forward, we're going to have more restrictions on how people fundraise in the crypto space. A lot of the SEC, what they're trying to prove is falling short in the courts. And the courts are saying, actually, this is just bad business operations and bad business practice or wire and banking fraud. This isn't necessarily what you're not proving enough that they're actually a security when they're actually trying to create a product. But I do think there will be more restrictions on how people fundraise. I don't think necessarily existing crypto is going to get the handcuffs that we're thinking, right? But going forward, it's going to be like, hey, and trust me, as an owner of a cryptocurrency company, our own chain, I actually really want regulation. Paying for our legal bills and kind of gray area of regulation. It's a really tough world to live in, and it's not fun to sleep in. So, if they could figure that out, but they're not saying like, here are the regulations and or here's how we classify it. They haven't done that, which I think is coming on the horizon, right? And I think that'll be a good thing because there needs to be some sort of way of understanding what is acceptable and what's not for these currencies.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating, and you do a really good job of explaining kind of in normal terms what all this is. I will probably listen to this 3 or 4 times to make sure I got it all. But last question I usually ask is, what's a great podcast that you like to listen to?
Yeah, I love listening to how things work. Interesting. I listen. Some of them are really good, and you're like, wow, I didn't even think of how the sewage system works in the world. And holy crap, all the different people that are involved and the thinking that goes through it. So that's definitely. And then of course yours. I love all the different individuals that you bring onto the show. It's such a diverse perspective, and it's cool to see that because, a lot of real estate investors are actually part of the Constellation community that I talk to on a daily basis. And they use this as kind of a way to, I don't want to say hedge their bet, but give them a different kind of look into the future and what's being built out there. And I think that's the kind of power that the crypto industry has brought is really kind of brought a whole world of people together into kind of painting a picture of the future. So
excellent. Well, thank you for that. We will definitely put those in the show notes, and you always get bonus points when you mention passive investing from left field. So if listeners want to get in touch with you, learn more about Constellation Network, learn more about DAG, what's the best way to do that?
My email, actually, I'm going to be sensitive about my personal information, but go to constellationnetwork.io. Constellationnetwork.io. You can find out all about what we're doing. I think we have a lot of details on some of the stuff we're doing with the United States Air Force, which is actually some of the most exciting stuff that we didn't really even touch on. It'll probably blow people's minds, but there's a lot of information out there. We have a Telegram community. We've got over 100,000 people that follow us on Twitter. We do a lot of our technical updates there. That's where you can kind of gather your information, see what people look for, which is a different set of rules in the crypto world. When you invest and purchase crypto, you're ultimately looking at a different set of rules, and there's more due diligence that's out there. It's kind of figure it out for yourself type thing. But we welcome people to join, and I'm happy to take calls and chats to talk more in detail about this stuff. So, Jim, thank you for the complimentary term or words that you did to describe the way that I described Web3 and crypto. It can be very confusing. And I know sometimes when I say these things, I'm thinking my parents oh God, they'll lose focus. But it's a really exciting time to be in this world of technology, right? And I think it's just cool to be able to talk to different groups about this that are already in the industry.
Yeah, well, absolutely. This was fantastic. We really appreciate your time, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
That was really fun talking to Ben, just about blockchain, Bitcoin. I have so many questions about that, and it is really complicated, but he has a way of making it easier to understand. As I said, I'll listen to this 2 or 3 times because it is so complicated, but that's the benefit of being a podcast host. That's the benefit of being in a community like ours. You can always have these conversations that allow you to extend your learning and hear things more and more, and then you end up learning more. And so that's great. One interesting thing about him, he's a creative guy, and I never really put creative and tech together, but he is building out these apps that are going to, hopefully power the world in the future. So you have to have a lot of creativity for that. And so it's interesting to put creativity and tech together, and what do you end up with? You end up with some pretty interesting crypto coins and blockchain ledgers and all the other stuff he was talking about. I also thought it was really cool that he owns a couple of restaurants. What I didn't ask and should have is if you can buy a sandwich there with Bitcoin or DAG or any of those other coins, if he takes them at his restaurant. But he talked a lot about how the blockchain currently, it's cumbersome and it's difficult to use, and it's certainly difficult to understand until you get that one killer app like ChatGPT did for AI. You need something for the blockchain that is going to get people thinking less about speculation and how to make money, buying Bitcoin, and more about the actual tech behind it. And it's getting better. And if they could come up with that one killer app, the first one I would recommend, as I mentioned, is title companies, right? There's so much friction and there's so many people taking a piece, taking a cut as you go through the transaction of buying a property. If you could go to this trustless system, which sounds like you don't trust anybody, but it means you don't have to trust anybody because you trust everybody working together. And, get that one killer app, and all of a sudden blockchain and everything is off to the races because people can understand it a little bit better when there is something that you can understand and see and use, right? And as Ben said, blockchain takes out the middleman. As I mentioned, there's all these different people dipping into it. If you can eliminate those for properties, or for buying a property, or any of these other things that numerous people are involved in, and you can reduce the friction, get rid of the extra people in there, it'll just mean that everything kind of runs more smoothly and there's more trust and you can accomplish things more efficiently. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where that goes. And it was fascinating having Ben on, and really appreciate the way he explains things in a easier to understand way. And I think there's going to be an ad on this podcast for Steve Sue's new book, but I have to mention it. Avoiding Rookie Errors as a Left Field Investor, 20 Lessons Learned from 14 years of passive investing in private syndications. I have to say, I've read advanced copies of it. It's phenomenal. It is the best book I have read on passive investing by far. Yes, I am biased because Steve Sue is one of the LFI founders. He's a great guy, a smart guy. But that book, I think it should be required reading. If they're going to change the syndicator rules, or not syndicator, but the accredited investor rules, I think this book, if you read this book, that should allow you to be accredited. Or maybe reverse. If you don't read this book, then you can't be accredited, because it gives you all of these lessons you can learn so you can avoid mistakes, right? You get a shortcut. You read this book, and in an hour or the hour and a half that it takes to read it, you're going to learn all kinds of things to look out for you so that you don't make the same mistakes that he made, that I made, that some of the people who have been doing this for a while have made. And this book is good for rookies, right before you do your first investment, all the way to people that are doing their 100th investment. I'm going to read this a couple times. Fantastic book. So I would recommend you go to our website and check it out. But that's all we have for this time. We'll catch you next time in the left field.